This is the laid out scene. I'm going to be rendering it out. What we'll have here are the columns with the various rough animations. If I make them visible, you will see that all of them going through various stages. Just maximize the X sheet and don't really need all of them visible at the moment. So we've got my references in the first three columns. As you can see, I do not have them marked for rendering. Then we have all the player and weapon columns, and I've renamed all the columns specifically. To rename the columns, you'll generally click on the first letter of the column, and I've renamed all the columns so that they match the same basic formula. In this case, it will be player and the animation. Then the first weapon will be weapon 01 and the animation name. And then the second weapon will be weapon 02 and the animation name. If we look at the level settings, you'll see that I've also renamed the level and basically kept the naming consistent with the level and the file name. These are not as important for my workflow as the actual column name, because the column name is what will affect the rendering. If we look at the scene in the browser, you will see all the level names here. Now before we render, I'm actually going to darken up these images. The problem is that in the game, these images are very faint. So to darken them, I'm going to go to Windows and Schematic, and then I'm going to go to the FX nodes, and I'm just going to expand that. And I'm just going to put in a couple of nodes between the X sheet and the output to darken them. So I'm going to go to Add Effects, going to go to Image Adjust, and I'm going to go to Brightness Contrast. And the other effect I'm going to add is going to be curves. At this point, it's merely for testing. I'm going to delete these nodes as soon as I get to the actual final renders. Making the renders darker will make it easier for me to test the timing and animation and the general gameplay in the game engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to up the contrast, and then I'm going to go to the curves, and I'm just going to raise the curves to make it darker. As you can see, it's going to be a much darker image now. And then I can exit from here. And then I'm going to open the render menu. Here I can choose which camera I'm going to be using. In this case, it's going to be the 256 camera. I can then render either in PNG files, or I can render as sprite sheets. Then the last thing I'm going to change is I'm going to go here to Other Settings. With multiple rendering, I'm going to change it to FX Schematic Flows. In this specific case, either one of these would work, but I do not have any special effects on the nodes themselves, so I can just use the schematic flows. And then I can render out the sprite sheets. Then if I go to my browser, go to Inputs, we will see that I now have all the sprite sheets rendered. Now, unfortunately, there is no way to render out sprite sheets without having to change the names in some way. You'll either have to render out each sprite sheet individually and name each sprite sheet as you render it, or you're going to render it out this way. You'll have the problem that it'll put the column's number at the end of every column name. And the problem with this is that if you have to add in extra drawings in between the columns numbers will change. So you'll have to either rename all the drawings by removing the column numbers manually, or if you're doing image sequences, you can rename the entire image sequence. Unfortunately, at the moment, there's no way to remove the column names when rendering out the columns individually. With rendering the sprite sheets themselves, click on the options. We have the options to trim empty space. If I trim empty space, it will make the sprite sheet smaller by cutting out space between the sprites. Unfortunately, trimming the sprites is not automatically going to be more efficient for your game engine. Even if you trim the empty space, it may have no effect, as a lot of game engines will pad the image file to make sure it has power of 2 in any case. Then you have the padding options, which will give you individual pixels at the top and the bottom of your images. If you're using trim, you should always add padding if possible. The reason you want to have padding is because when you're rendering the sprite sheets, at the point where sprites meet each other, the sampling could lead to colors bleeding over on the pixels where they meet. You want to have just a little space so that the renderer doesn't try and sample the pixels from the adjacent sprite. Over here we'll have all the images without padding, which as you can see are square and are all powers of 2 because of the way I laid out the images initially. If we were to render out the images again with the changes, you'll see that the padding can make some of these images quite a lot smaller. In the next video, I'm going to lay out the basics for the game and the game engine. And after that, we will go into implementing the sprite sheets within the engine itself.